You are listening to the Finding Her Palette. Book 6 of 7 in the Iron Rule collection. Written by Akumah and voiceover by Sara. Akumah Audiobooks. Chapter 3, Lost Among Masters. The day of the annual Urban Art Showcase arrived much faster than Rena expected, sweeping her into a whirlwind of nervous anticipation. She'd barely slept the night before, her thoughts tangled in a storm of worries and insecurities. But the time for doubts was over. Now, all that mattered was showing up and doing her best to present the pieces she had poured her heart into. Arriving at the gallery, Rena was greeted by a scene that was both dazzling and intimidating. The space was vast, filled with exhibits of every imaginable style and medium. Huge canvases hung from the walls, sculptures were arranged on pedestals, and vibrant, abstract pieces covered almost every inch of the gallery floor. Artists were bustling around, adjusting their displays, talking to patrons, and exchanging stories. The hum of conversation mixed with the soft jazz music playing overhead, creating an atmosphere that felt both alive and overwhelming. Rena felt like an imposter. This was a space for serious artists, those who had dedicated years, maybe even decades, to perfecting their craft. She felt her confidence waver as she set up her small booth, positioning her 3 pieces on the modest display panels the gallery had provided. She looked around at the other artists' booths, all meticulously organized, some with intricate lighting setups that highlighted the depth and detail of their work. In comparison, her setup seemed amateurish and simplistic, like an art school project rather than a professional exhibit. As she positioned her paintings, she caught snippets of conversation from nearby booths. 2 artists were talking excitedly about their past exhibitions, recounting shows they'd held in cities like Paris, New York, and Berlin. Another artist was explaining the inspiration behind his latest work, citing obscure art movements and philosophical concepts that went straight over Rena's head. She felt a growing sense of unease. These artists seemed to belong in a world far removed from hers, a world she had only glimpsed from afar. Her paintings, which had once felt so personal and meaningful, suddenly appeared small and insignificant. One of her pieces, a portrait of a young woman lost in thought, painted in soft, muted colors, looked almost too quiet among the bold, expressive works surrounding it. Another piece, an abstract landscape of vibrant blues and greens, seemed to fade into the background next to the massive, intricate installations nearby. Her third painting, a close-up of hands reaching out toward each other, felt out of place, lacking the complexity of the art that surrounded it. As the first patrons began to wander through the gallery, Rena's heart raced. She watched as people paused at the booths around her, admiring the works on display, asking questions, and complimenting the artists. But when they reached her booth, most of them barely glanced at her pieces before moving on. Some gave polite smiles, others looked confused or indifferent. She tried to engage with a few visitors, but her nervous attempts at small talk fell flat. Her words felt clumsy, inadequate, like they were only pushing people further away rather than drawing them in. For hours, she stood there, feeling invisible. She watched as other artists received praise, saw them smile confidently as patrons asked to buy their pieces or requested commissions. She saw gallery owners chatting with established artists, exchanging contact information and discussing potential collaborations. The other artists seemed so at ease, so sure of their place in this world. Meanwhile, Rena felt like a ghost drifting through the event, present but unseen, her work unnoticed. Her confidence shattered bit by bit with each passing hour. She started to question why she had even come. Maybe Lara and her family had been wrong to encourage her. Maybe she had mistaken her love for painting as a sign of talent, when in reality, she was just a hobbyist playing pretend. The voice of doubt grew louder, drowning out the small glimmers of pride she had once felt in her work. She felt herself shrinking, as though she were fading into the shadows of the gallery, lost among the masters surrounding her. As the evening wore on, Rena's emotions hit a breaking point. She slipped away from her booth and found a quiet corner near the back of the gallery. She leaned against the wall, her hands shaking as she tried to steady her breathing. It was as if the walls were closing in, the voices around her blurring into a hum of incomprehensible chatter. She couldn't bear to look at her paintings anymore, couldn't bear to see them standing there, exposed and unappreciated. She closed her eyes, trying to summon the courage to return to her booth, to keep going despite the doubt gnawing at her. But the doubt only grew stronger, fueled by the reminders of her perceived inadequacy. She wondered if the other artists had ever felt this way, or if they had always known they belonged. Maybe they were born with a confidence she could never hope to find. Maybe they had a gift she simply didn't possess. Just as she was about to leave her hiding place and slink back to her booth, she felt a tap on her shoulder. Startled, she turned to see an elderly man with silver hair and a warm, wrinkled smile. He was dressed simply, in a tweed jacket and a scarf, his eyes twinkling with kindness. "Are you one of the artists?" he asked, his voice gentle. "Yes," she replied hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought so. I saw your work, those hands reaching out. There's something quite moving about it," he said. "It reminded me of an old friend of mine. I couldn't help but linger there for a moment. It's a powerful piece, you know." Rina's heart skipped a beat. She stared at him, unsure if he was serious or just trying to be polite. "Thank you," she managed, her voice trembling. He nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "Sometimes, we create for others, hoping they'll see what we see. But often, we create for ourselves, and that's where the real power lies. I could see that in your work, something honest, something vulnerable. Don't let the grandeur of the surroundings make you doubt what you bring to the table. Art is about more than just fitting in, it's about offering a glimpse into our own souls." Rina felt a lump form in her throat as his words sank in. She had been so focused on trying to measure up to the other artists, on trying to belong in their world, that she had forgotten why she painted in the first place. Art had always been her way of expressing the things she couldn't put into words, her way of connecting with herself and, hopefully, with others. The man's words were like a balm, soothing the ache of inadequacy she had felt all evening. "Thank you," she said again, her voice stronger this time. "I needed to hear that." He smiled, patting her shoulder before walking away, leaving her alone with her thoughts. Rina took a deep breath, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. She returned to her booth, no longer fixated on the crowd's approval or the grandeur of the event. Instead, she focused on the art itself, on the stories each piece told, and on the quiet satisfaction of having shared a part of herself with the world, no matter how small. As the night drew to a close, a young woman stopped by Rina's booth, her gaze lingering on the painting of the hands. She seemed hesitant at first, but finally spoke. I really like this one," she said shyly. "There's something about it that feels comforting, like it's telling me I'm not alone." Rina's heart swelled. In that moment, she realized that even if only one person connected with her work, that was enough. She didn't need to be a master, she just needed to be herself, to paint from her heart, and trust that her art would find those who needed it. As she packed up her things at the end of the night, she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. She had faced her fear, shared her work, and, most importantly, rediscovered the joy of creating for herself. The showcase might not have been the dazzling breakthrough she had once imagined, but it had given her something far more valuable, a newfound confidence in her voice as an artist, a reminder of why she painted, and a small but steady spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, her work could make a difference in someone else's life. Akumah Audiobooks. You have reached to the end of the chapter. Click next and continue listening to Akumah Audiobooks. This story consists total of 7 chapters, as such 7 videos. Refer to channel playlist for better experience and sequence. Subscribe.